We're going to take a quick break to hear a word from our sponsors. This episode of the Made to Sustain podcast is brought to you with the support of Juneberry Ridge in Norwood, North Carolina. There aren't many places quite like it. Juneberry Ridge is an expansive farm set on the foothills of the Uwharrie Mountains, and it's a farm designed to be a destination to nourish, educate, and build a better future. It's a place that welcomes guests from all over the country to reconnect with nature, to retreat into comfy, cozy cabins, and enjoy delicious farm-fresh food. Every experience at Juneberry Ridge is prepared through a partnership amongst the land, the animals, the farmers who work it, and a culinary team whose mission it is to awaken curiosity for seasonal eating. The foods grown at Juneberry Ridge are not optimized for size and scale like conventional farming practices, but through regenerative practices that promote the health of you, the plant, and the planet. Their motto at Juneberry Ridge is to let nature lead. I was so grateful I got to visit this special place in North Carolina, and I think you will be too. They have so many activities from mixology courses to forest bathing to bottle feeding baby lambs, and even the occasional concert. There's so much to do here, and they really invite community to come in and learn more about the future of farming. You can learn more about farm stays, about other activities, and about education opportunities at juneberry.com.
We have to reward those people because if the market rewards them, they will get there faster, right? And already what I see in the lab specs is I start seeing this different spec sheet that's very typical of regenerative wheats. Like things start looking a little bit different than commodity.
Hey there, and welcome to this week's episode of the Made to Sustain podcast. I really enjoyed my conversation with this week's guest, Joni Kindwill-Moore, who has such an interesting background. She studied ethnobotany and ethnopharmacology and then spent 15 years as an ICU nurse and was really inspired by the patients that she saw every day coming in the ICU and what that meant for a change in just regular diets and our food system as a whole. And she is such a dedicated and passionate person, and she knows so much about our food systems. She's working with farmers, boots on the ground, to really help change the food system. Joni is involved in so many things. I met her at a climate conference back in March, and I just had such a fascinating conversation with her. Make sure you tune in to this week's episode where we'll be covering topics from regenerative farming to choosing regenerative ingredients and the overall importance of biodiversity within our food system. I hope you enjoy this episode as much as I did. It was a fascinating conversation, and I can't wait to hear what you think. Hello, everyone. I'm Kelly D'Amico, the host of the Made to Sustain podcast, and I'm here with Joni Kindwill-Moore.
Hi. Thanks for having me, Kelly.
Of course. Super nice to have you here on the podcast. I know you've been involved in a bunch of things in the regenerative agriculture and nutrition space, so I'm super excited to have you on today to talk about that.
Excellent. Yeah, definitely my favorite topics, so fire away.
Yeah, one of mine as well. I like to ask my guests when they come on the show, what is the most interesting food you've eaten lately?
You know, gosh, that's a tough question. I haven't really eaten anything super interesting lately, to be totally honest. I feel like I've been in one of those spells where we've just been defaulting to the same things over and over again, which has been kind of silly, but my kids are starting to do a lot more cooking. And so they're coming up with things that I wouldn't normally do, like concoctions of spices I wouldn't normally combine. So I'll just say my son's been making some fantastic stuff, and he made some amazing beans, like just plain old pinto beans the other day, and put just some different spices in it that I wouldn't normally do, and it was fantastic. So good job.
That's great.
Next generation.
Yeah, that's awesome. And then my segue to that, to talk about our topic, is, are you worried about climate change messing up those beans?
I am. Actually, that's something that I'm very focused on, is just as we shift our agricultural growing regions in response to changing climate. That's something that we actively work on the market side, because the issue that we're having in our neck of the woods, which is like the Pacific Northwest and the Northern Rockies, is that climate is pushing that change faster than infrastructure is responding. And so we now have this mismatch of farmers needing to grow crops in response to those changes, but we're lacking the infrastructure and the market path to get it to all work economically. So that's a space I'm very, very involved with. So I'm glad you asked that question.
Yeah. So how does that affect farmers? Like, are they going to have to be growing new crops or changing the times they plant? What does that look like?
Yeah, all of the above. In fact, for our farmers, it's actually a huge opportunity because it's allowing them to grow crops that weren't able to be grown in our region before. And so we're the last, 50 to 80 years has seen a lot of focus on just monocropping and hyper consolidation. So certain regions just had certain commodities, and that's what dominated the landscape. And now with things changing, there is a pressure to diversify for a number of reasons, like regenerative ag being one of them, but also just to respond to hotter, longer growing seasons. And for some of our farmers, an additional opportunity to grow. There's like a whole nother revenue stream that's becoming available because of that extension of our growing season. So where our, dominant landscape in Eastern Washington and a lot of Idaho has always been wheat. And it's like wheat, maybe some barley, maybe a garbanzo bean or a canola rotation. Now, and then a summer fallow has been like kind of the dominant landscape feature. And now a lot of our farmers are planting crops to eliminate the summer fallow, which is really important from a regenerative ag perspective, but is also bringing in an additional revenue stream that wasn't an option for them before.
There's a lot to unpack.
I know, that's like agronomy nerdville, but it's really important when you think about it, because we have to pair the market pull and then the infrastructure accessibility to those shifts in climate patterns and agriculture to really make the system adapt quickly and to maintain productivity using those kind of optimized systems.
I want to take a couple steps back just to make sure the audience is all on the same page here. Why is summer fallow important and regenerative agriculture important? I know those are two kind of different questions.
Yeah, no, it's a really good question.
Why do you think they're important?
Well, one of the foundational principles of regenerative agriculture is always having soil armor. Like you always have living root in the ground year round as much as possible. You always have the ground covered. And traditionally in our farming systems out west, we'd harvest the wheat and then till everything, and then we'll just sit there and bake in the sun, completely exposed and really susceptible to both wind and water erosion. I live in the panhandle of Idaho, which is heavily forested, but in the summer, during the tilling season, as we go into that summer fallow, we'll have these huge dust storms that literally leave so much dust on our cars and all of our, literally your barbecue will have to be hosed off because there's so much topsoil that blows in. And, the same thing when we have rain events like thunderstorms, it'll clog up the streams, which are critical habitat for salmon and all kinds of other things. And it's just a bit of a disaster. So with the lengthening of our growing season here, we now have an opportunity to plant hot, dry crops like proso millet, sorghum, sunflowers, beans, canola. Like canola actually is blooming right now, so it's on a different planting. And I'm not a farmer, I'm not an agronomist, so that's not my area of expertise, but I try to really be responsive to our farming system so that we're working with nature rather than against it, and that we're setting up the market to be responsive to nature and to changes with climate.
Yeah. And I want to go back to millet and to sorghum. Mm-hmm. Those are two products that you use a lot in the Snacktivist products, right? Yeah,
that's right. We've built an entire innovation program around sorghum and millet. And we have a baking mix line, which most people kind of know us by that. That's not actually ever been like our real focus, but it was very relevant during COVID. So that's where we put our energy. But we have other lines that have to do with sorghum and millet innovation, ranging from pizza crusts made out of sorghum and millet, pita bread. We have IQF ancient grains, which are like frozen. So that way, when you buy a bag of peas and they're perfectly frozen and they roll out of the bag, we're doing that with ancient grains so that you can just heat and eat and have really great quality nutrition.
That's so convenient.
It's so convenient. So those are really focused on food service channels right now. So they're not as evident to the public, but we're hoping that in time they will be available at your local grocery store as well. Someday.
That's cool. Yeah, I mean, one step at a time, for sure.
Yeah, we're really excited about those underutilized crops because of, they have fantastic nutritional profiles and they bring a lot of great value to just human nutrition and gut microbiome and gut health, but also they play a really great role in climate adaptive agriculture and building soil health.
Talk to me a little bit about that word climate adaptive. What does that mean?
Yeah, so generally speaking, when you're talking about climate adaptive initiatives at the farm level, right now water pressure is such a big deal pretty much everywhere in the world, definitely in North America. And there's a push to try to find more crops that are suited for hot, dry conditions. So they have a lot of drought tolerance naturally. And wheat is already a drought tolerant crop. A lot of people don't realize that. But we can't just always have wheat after wheat after wheat, because then you have endemic pests and you have a lot of problems. Sorghum is excessively drought tolerant. Like, it's incredible. So is Proso millet. And in fact, we did a trial here in the Pacific Northwest through a grant program for sustainable initiatives in ag, where we had some farmers that went out and they harvested their wheat, and then they just drilled. They used like a grain drill. They didn't till. They left the stubble all there, and they drilled the Proso millet right into that wheat stubble. Well, we had a heat dome that year. Like, it was like 115 degrees. We didn't have a drop of rain for like over 2 months. And that Proso millet actually germinated and grew. It was stunty. It wasn't the prettiest harvest I've ever seen. It wouldn't win any awards for like being perfect yield, perfect product. But the fact that it germinated and survived it all, to me, was actually like mind blowing. Like, it really solidified my dedication to elevating these crops that have that hardiness, because you think about the wild extremes that are coming with climate change. That's one of the things that's just part of it, is we do have an overall trending of increased temperature globally, but then we have wild fluctuations in conditions like, extreme drought, extreme rainfall. And so, finding crops that have the hardiness where they can respond to varied conditions is going to be critical for food security. So that's why we focus on those adaptive crops.
Nice. That's a super helpful explanation. And I didn't realize that sorghum could grow with no water and at that high of
I mean, it likes water to get started, to be totally clear. Like, it likes
most things
it
do,
likes it needs it. Like, if you plant sorghum and it never got a drop of rain, I don't know how well it would come up, but that millet example was just absolutely mind-blowing to me. And the only thing we could theorize was that because of the humidity at night and the dew point, that wheat stubble would allow for condensation, and it was just enough moisture to come down and trigger that germination. So that's something that some people who are really savvy with agronomy and farming can investigate. That's not my wheelhouse, but it was just a very inspiring thing to me to hear that success story and to see it with my own eyes. I actually was out on that farm during harvest and got to experience that. And then hearing from some of our other wheat farmers in the region that have been planting sorghum, they're finding, because sorghum has such deep root structures, it helps pull up critical nutrients from deeper in the soil layer, and then it leaves great little channels for water penetration. So even the next year, you grow your sorghum, you harvest it, that root erodes over the winter, and it leaves little porous channels where water can penetrate deep into the soil. And one of the wheat farmers I work with said that he gets a 20 to 25% increase in yield of wheat if he follows it after the sorghum. And he attributes it just to like the magical properties of sorghum on soil health.
Wow. So it sounds like it's crop rotation then, not...
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Cool. It just, again, it's, and our guys out here, they grow the sorghum, they grow the millet, and there's literally no market to sell it into. So we're working on that, but until recently, we hadn't had any capital really to get that done, to like build those market paths. And so we did just receive a $3 million grant from the USDA.
Amazing.
OMDG, Organic Market Development Grant, because millet in particular is really valuable in organic rotations. And so that is going to allow us to grow that market for Proso millet specifically in our region in Northern Rockies and West, and actually have valuable infrastructure to get it processed so it can go to market.
Is there a difference between, I think you said Proso millet?
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Proso millet and regular millet, or are they all the same?
Well, that is a really good question, because there's actually 9 dominant millets, and they're all different species entirely. Like they're not the same plant. Proso millet is what is most commonly called millet in the United States. And so if you go to the store and you buy a bag and it says millet, I'd say 99% of the time that's going to be proso millet. But it is a problem because there isn't any regulation over that. Like it's just commonly called millet. And it could be the other 8 species that are commonly called millet. And so a lot of those other millets are not commercialized in the United States for seed production for human grade consumption. So they're mostly grown into livestock, like for bird feed and whatnot. But we're hoping that that'll change as well. We'd like to see a lot of these other millets become commercialized. They have incredible value when it comes to managing diabetes through diet interventions. Like there's just a lot of really cool functional food properties in those millets that need to be explored. They're very nutrient dense. A lot of them are low glycemic index. Proso millet is not considered a low glycemic index grain, but it does have a really great, set of properties that does make it better tolerated than, say, white rice, for example. So there's a huge opportunity here to explore diversified grain staples just with millets in North America, and it's literally not been tapped at all.
Wow, that's super fascinating.
Yeah, and the farmers want to grow these crops. In fact, a lot of the farmers already grow them, and they just, it's called roller crimping. They just go out and they cut it before it even seeds. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So or they just feed it to livestock. So it's being grown. It's just not being commercialized. And that's a big deal, especially when you look at the burden of diet-related disease. And we know that just a diet that's heavy in refined wheat, corn, and rice contributes to diet-related disease.
Yeah, absolutely. How did you get so involved in understanding your farm and your farming community? And it sounds like you've been involved in a lot of, research grants and everything. How did you start?
It's kind of an odd thing because I grew up on a very small farm in Western Oregon. So I was always surrounded by agriculture. Like I would work in the summers. I would go live with my aunt and uncle and work harvest and drive harvest machinery and stuff. So I always had a real connection with where food came from in that way. Like on our little farm, we had orchards and stuff where I lived. So, just kind of constant connection to food in that way. And then I went into hard sciences and I studied ethnobotany and ethnopharmacology. So that's the study of like the chemistry and how that affects the human body that comes from plants. So that was more...
That is so
it's
cool.
Super fun. That is an incredible field. A lot of my focus there was on medicinal plants, but when you look at that same application in foods and the whole foods as medicine or foods for health or foods for wellness, functional foods, whatever you want to call it, that's an unexplored area when it comes to addressing staple foods. Because my theory is how do we bring back those medicinal phytonutrients into our staple foods that we eat every day that drive healthy gut microbiome, that drive healthy cardiovascular disease, that maybe have anti-cancer compounds that humans formerly consumed all the time just because we ate them in our food every day. And we've bred most of those compounds out in the last 50 years with modern breeding. We've lost over 75% of our genetic diversity in general in our food crops, totally gone. And with that, a lot of those medicinal compounds that we never studied, because back then we had no way to really quantify that. And now we do. And we're starting to understand that these compounds are absolutely a critical part of the nutritional profile. So that's why I get so excited about the farm level management, because if you're trying to drive food innovation to be truly healthy and have those more medicinal components, that's a molecular play. And that has everything to do with genetics of the crop and management of the crop, because it's that combination of the genetics and the environment that actually creates the metabolomic expression of the compounds that are now medicinal for your body. So it's deep science involved here. Most food innovators they just don't have interest, or maybe they don't have a background or whatever. But I think
we didn't cover it in the food science program. I can tell you that was a totally separate field.
It's not part of it. And that's the field I was in. And I want to bring that back to the food system. So we have to understand how management practices drive that, because what we do know is that a lot of the expression of these compounds in the plants are driven by ecosystem pressures. Communities of different microbes, communities of other plants, livestock intervention, etc. And so there's a whole emerging science there that is really part of indigenous knowledge systems. I mean, way back, but now we're looking at it through the lens of Western reductionistic science. And it's like a whole nother opportunity to completely transform our food system in a new and novel way. I mean, it's an old way, but through the modern understanding with our science that we have today, it truly is a novel way of looking at things.
Yeah. And there's so much knowledge.
It's so cool. I love that stuff. But at the end of the day, a lot of science just hangs out in science land, and it never really leaves and enters the private sector where it impacts people every day. I know when I was involved with hard sciences and research, that was one of the frustrations I heard from the professors I worked with all the time, is that they would feel like they would do so much work and it was important work, but it never impacted anybody because it stayed in a silo. So, again, that's one of those lessons. And one of the things that drew me to the private sector as a food systems innovator that actually makes products and sells products, it's like, that's the channel. That's how you can get it out into the world. Mm-hmm. But
yeah, and you took a break from ethnobotany and ethnopharmacology. Talk to me a little bit about what drove that decision and what you ended up doing. Yeah,
well, that's a good question. Honestly, I was a lab grant, so I would have needed to go on to graduate, PhD level research. And, I had gotten married, and my family was just not supportive of academics as a career, to be totally honest. They were just like, oh, wow, you don't go past a bachelor's degree. You just don't. So it was always kind of like, why would you do that? And then my husband and I were like, if I do get my PhD, the two research centers that I'd likely live in and work in are either in Chicago or New York City, which are both great places, but I just didn't think I wanted to live there and raise a family there because I tend to live more rural. And so that was part of that decision making too. And he was a nurse, and he would come home from work, and it was like, what'd you do today? Oh my gosh, this lady came in and she literally had a baby in the lobby, and we saved the day. This was in rural Alaska, so it was critical access hospitals. And I'm like, God, that's really cool, because a lot of what I was studying, that's kind of where it comes home to roost. So I ended up I had done pre-med, so I had all of that education in place, and had decided to not go into medical school, same reasons. And I just went into nursing. So I spent 14 years at the bedside as an RN, and I did ICU, cardiac ICU, emergency, and diabetic education. So again, it was literally seeing the palliative care side of our food system every day. I mean, especially in cardiac ICU. I mean, we can do amazing things. It's like a spaceship. It's so cool. I love having that skill set. If somebody literally tries to die in a room with me, good luck, because we're really equipped to jump to it and try to save you. Right. It's kind of nice having that skill set. You need if you're going to try to die, do it with Roy and I around, because it won't, we'll probably be able to bring you back. But
noted.
Yeah, it's kind of funny like that. But honestly, when you see the firsthand effects, because we were really health centered at home, we weren't eating. I mean, of course, if you're on vacation or something, you eat whatever, but our day-to-day food was completely not what the average American eats. And you just see this stark correlation with just long-term morbidity and loss of productivity, mental health, physical deterioration associated with just our modern American diet. And it's so sad. That's what drove me to leave and focus on staples. I mean, kale chips and raw almonds are not going to save us. They're great and all, but there's this kind of mindset that's very puritanical in America, where it's if you're healthy, you just, you eat this really restrictive puritanical diet. You know what I mean? And I'm like, no, why can't we just
chicken, broccoli, and rice?
Exactly.
I see so many people doing that, and not for nothing. You need variety.
You need variety, and most importantly, what I learned as a diabetic educator is you will only win if you meet people where they're at. So I was like, how do we make a better burger? How do we make a better pizza? How do we make just better staples that people find familiar and approachable and like?
Hey, it's Kelly here. Just wanted to take a quick second to tell you that if you're enjoying the Made to Sustain podcast, you should check out madetosustain.com. Made to Sustain covers so many topics and really encompasses the complete value chain around food sustainability. From sustainable recipes to figuring out how to source sustainable ingredients in your own grocery store, to even learning about how you can use and reduce your food waste at home. MadeToSustain.com is full of actionable ways that you can make an impact and help you make informed decisions when it matters the most. You can check out things like our seasonal produce guide, seasonal plant-forward meal plans, and explore our directory of sustainable products. Make sure you sign up to our email list where you'll get all the latest updates straight to your inbox so you're always informed. Now back to the episode. Here at Made to Sustain, we're thrilled to support One Step Closer, or OSC's annual sustainability campaign, the PAC Pact. The OSC PAC Pact is a collective action campaign working to promote a circular economy and reduce single-use packaging in the natural products industry. To address this systematic issue, OSC is inspiring innovations in product packaging that minimize waste while raising consciousness about the environmental impact of our choices, empowering brands and packaging manufacturers and consumers to take action. OSC is calling on our peers to join us by pledging to make actionable progress around circular packaging. When you take the PAC Pact, you'll receive a discount code to shop select products from leading natural brands that you love, and you'll be automatically entered into a product giveaway from natural brands like Traditional Medicinals, Mountain Rose Herbs, and Banyan Botanicals. You'll also receive a user-friendly digital guidebook directly to your email to help you decipher packaging labels and certifications. Learn about how you can make an impact on the waste problem and fun ways you can involve your community. Conscious consumers can join the PAC Pact in the link below. By taking a PAC Pact, you'll be a beacon of inspiration, and we encourage you to share your story with. Make sure you follow along as OSC champions innovation and circularity over the next few months through educational content, webinars, events, and more. I'm a proud member of the PAC Pact, and I hope you decide to join too.
And so that to me is like, if we can get like the In-N-Out burgers of the world on board doing regenerative wheat buns and like regenerative beef, like that, regenerative potatoes, like that's when we're going to win, because burgers and fries and fast food are never going to go away. Like that's just the reality.
Right.
We have to get them to serve better quality food, and it can't just be a pale, sad, soggy salad. Like that's never going to work. Like we need to build a better burger. At the end of the day, that was my realization after working with patients hands-on for 15 years.
I don't think you're wrong either. When I was in grad school, part of my capstone, like our thesis presentation was all around how do you communicate sustainability efforts to the public, which was, how I got started with Made to Sustain. Because it was kind of, a continuation of that. And I really found the topic interesting. And one of the things I realized was that, we did a little focus group and tried to figure out what are people actually interested in the world of sustainability, like what's going to drive those purchase decisions. And it's all around health.
All around health and flavor. If it tastes better, they will buy it. And they may not even care if it's more sustainable. I mean, that's the reality of it. It's sad, but it's true.
I wish more people got on board with caring about it, but yeah. I agree. I think we're a bit of a ways away, but how far do you think we are from getting regenerative buns in a Burger King?
Oh my gosh, we could do it tomorrow. I mean, honestly, like it may not be rock certified, like regenerative organic. It's literally going to be at scale, productive ag, regenerative transition. But I mean, I literally have spec sheets for wheat, hard winter wheat, which is, that's appropriate for bread making, sent to me all the time from regenerative farmers. I mean, I have millions and millions and millions of pounds, by the way, because they'll just like, hey, do you know somebody who can help us move this? Here's our regenerative system. Here's what we're doing. They're not often at that like peak scale yet, like Gabe Brown level where they're actively regenerating, but they're like working to get there. And we have to reward those people, because if the market rewards them, they will get there faster, right? And already what I see in the lab specs is I start seeing this different spec sheet that's very typical of regenerative wheats. Like things start looking a little bit different than commodity.
How so?
Not an expert in that because wheat is not my bag. And so I kind of lean on people like Claudia Carter at the California Wheat Commission and people who really know wheat. Kevin Morris at Carn Spring Mill. Like there's a lot of people out there who really know wheat. I try to stay in my lane, but I'm just starting to notice these things like just difference in protein content and difference in ash content and just little things that I'm like, there's something going on here. And there is a lot of it out there. Where I focus when it comes to things like that is I like to know at the farm level, how was your regiment of care? So most of our regenerative farmers are actively transitioning away from dependency on synthetics. And if you look at their records and you ask them the right questions, like we have farmer intake forms and we're developing tech that can actually upload it via APIs from all of their systems so that they don't have to do the manual entry. It just automatically goes up. And then we get onto a blockchain. And then on the blockchain, it's quantified and we can start going, okay, this farm on their 20,000 acres over this time period has reduced their dependency on XYZ biocides, like whatever the chemicals are, fertilizers, etc. And then we want to convert that so we can actually equate it to greenhouse gas savings as well, because that can help pave the way for other profit and revenue channels for farmers for getting rewarded for doing the right work, right? That doesn't necessarily play into the nutrition, but it plays into the ESG, which is, again, a big pressure point for purchasing at the B2B level. Like if you're approaching Wendy's and you're like, hey, Wendy's, like, let's do a regenerative bun. You guys can do this. Let's figure this out. Even if we start mass balance, let's just start with a 5 or 10% of your wheat procurement, but let's verify it that it's from a system. And let's give you that data. Let's let you buy it because I want them to buy it from our farmers because that's the polite thing to do. And then they can report it to their shareholders or to their customers and go, hey, we're working with these farmers and look at what they're doing. Like, this is quantifiable data that shows they're growing a better quality product. It has more nutrition and it has actually quantifiable data associated with it to show that it's impacting climate, greenhouse gases, synthetic chemicals going into the environment, and soil health. And to me, that's like the holy grail. Like, that's what we're working towards at Snacktivist, is like, how do we create a business model that pulls all of that in and allows the market to shift to be responsive to good practice?
Yeah, and I think that's great. Would you say farmers across the board are reducing their dependency on
they have to. It's
chemical
too
pesticides?
Expensive. Cost is a huge factor. I mean, all of those things, even if you love chemicals, you're looking at how you can reduce them because of cost right now. The farmers I work with, by and large, the reason I have the conversation with them in the first place and they reach out to me is because already something has made them look at their farm and go, this just doesn't feel right. Like, I don't know what we need to do, but we don't want to keep doing it the way we've been doing it. And I think that speaks volumes, that it's literally a gut instinct that tells them that there's got to be a better way. And unfortunately, it's contrary to what, like, all the sales guys that come out to the farm who are their friends. I mean, these people work in the engine and they're good people. You know what I mean? It's not that they're bad people. Their job is to sell chemicals. And so there's just this kind of disconnect. But the chemical companies are starting to realize they have to change. I mean, they're going to have to lean into, nature-derived things if they want to keep their businesses, especially in the face of a lot of precedent-setting lawsuits that have come at us the last couple of years. So,
that makes sense. One thing that I always found really kind of an interesting dichotomy is, there's people who, don't want pesticides on their food. I totally understand. But they kind of paint and portray this picture of farmers just having, like, chemicals dumped on their crops. And I think there's a huge misnomer there.
Totally.
Because farmers aren't going to use more chemical pesticides, chemical fertilizers, or any other additive that they don't need, because it's just going to add more cost to their production and make food more expensive. So why use extra?
It cuts into their profitability significantly. I feel like in general, the average person has a kind of an inaccurate idea of who farmers are. Like, they are some of the most educated and intelligent people you will ever meet. And most of them are really good business people. They're really in the top tier of, like, management thinking. It's really impressive. I'm always like, hey, you guys are our CEOs of the farm. I mean, that's what you do. You just don't think of yourself that way. But, a lot of the farmers I work with have masters and some even PhD prepared. It's incredible. At the end of the day, a lot of what is triggering this transition, because a lot of what they're taught at the ag schools is that you cannot farm and feed the world without chemicals. That's been, like, what we've heard for a long time. And, chemicals are never going to go away 100%. Just like in the ICU, we're never going to switch to just herbal tinctures and poultices. Like, there is a role for all things. but we need to have the holistic model in place first. And then you use chemicals just like in the environment, like in the medical setting. I mean, you really hope someone, if they're sick, they do diet, they do more natural interventions. And then if they really need it, they come to the ICU and we nuke them with crazy, crazy drugs. But that's because it's critical and they really need it. And that's, I think, how we should treat agriculture as well, is that you like use all the natural holistic interventions first. But if something horrible happens, like you get some disease that, or a pest, you don't want to like lose 10,000 acres of your crop either. And that's when you have a use case of like judicious and appropriate use of chemicals. And I don't want to eat chemicals on my food either. I mean, I totally get that. But then again, you don't want to have like massive crop loss should there be some crazy thing that happens. I'd take some chemicals over starvation too.
There's a balance for sure.
The organic people like get kind of mad at me when I say that. But
I know.
When it comes down to it, and if it was a food scarcity thing, they would change their mind. I mean, that's the whole deal. So how do we have at-scale agriculture using the lowest footprint possible of synthetics and maximizing biology as the center of the equation? That's the holy grail. That's how we're going to feed 10 billion people.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I think I know the organic movement will get upset for hearing this, but there's also a role for genetic modification too, right? Like how can you breed out drought-resistant crops and ones that you breed for less chemicals and less chemical usage. Again, it should be like the very last resort. Like I actually have some very deeply held issues with like CRISPR modification at the genetic level, because you can't control germplasm movement. You know what I mean? Like pollen floats everywhere, seeds get around. And I think that's tampering with things that we may not know what the unintended consequences are. But like hybridization and selection of crops, I love landrace. I'm a huge fan of landrace and open source seeds and seed sovereignty. But I do work with very specific hybrid programs that they're producing crops that have exactly the expression that we want of medicinal compounds or protein level or a beautiful carbohydrate that makes a nice flour. And the reason they can get those results is because of just modern Mendelian breeding. I mean, it's just discipline, right? Selective. Yeah, it's just selective.
It's selective. And that's optimizing nature. It's not manipulating nature in my book.
Yeah.
But if it comes to actual genetic modification or like bioengineering, inserting genes from other species, to me, that's like a hard line in the sand where I'm like, we should know how to do that, but we should never have it out in the wild, ever.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a tough field. Like I see a lot of sides to it. Like as someone, I have worked in for large food companies, and I understand that there is a place for feeding the masses, and sometimes you need to have that genetic modification, but it is tough.
I think we can work around it. Honestly, I don't think we need it. I think that a lot of that mindset is that we see nutritional deficiencies or we see deficiencies in the world that could be closed. The gap could be closed by bringing back genetic diversity.
Yeah.
And
I
so
100% agree with that.
The argument for like, well, we have to do genetic modification, it's because of the principled thinking of like the monocrop mindset. Well, yeah, if we're living off of 7 species globally for all of our caloric needs, yeah, we've got a problem. But if we bring back nature's diversity and diversify our food staples, we correct those nutritional imbalances. Like you look at like vitamin deficiencies in many parts of the world where they rely on rice. Well, why are they relying on rice? Like, why don't we diversify their diets again like they used to be 500 years ago? I mean, like the economy of China was not built on rice. It was built on millet.
Yeah, right.
It was built on wheat and millet and rice. It was built on diversity. The lack of diversity is driving nutritional deficiencies, and then depletion of our soil is further accelerating micronutrient deficiencies, especially. And we can correct that through regeneration, because regenerative ag will bring back crop diversity, because that's what drives that engine. And through that crop diversity and repairing the soil health, that will help correct a lot. In my mind, in my opinion, that'll help correct a lot of the problems.
That's a really interesting perspective. I never thought about GMOs as the monocropping mindset, but
It is. It's
it
exactly
makes
what it is.
it makes perfect sense. I just
Globally, it's fed a lot of people. I don't want to wrong it for what it was and why it got started after World War II. There was a very good reason that we put all of our focus and impetus on calories because we
right.
had global hunger and it was awful and people were starving everywhere. But now we need to rethink the equation because now we're experiencing a $1 trillion healthcare epidemic that is driving problems and death rates that are every bit as severe as starvation. It's kind of sad to say, but
No, yeah.
complications of diabetes, complications of cardiovascular disease, cancer, it's, it's also significant, costly, and creates human suffering.
Yeah. And I think we also have an excess of how many calories we have too, right? One third of
Totally.
all food grown is wasted. Where's the
Yeah.
optimization there, right? If we can start to make it so that our foods are more nutritious, there's more options, if
Yep.
it's grown and it's optimized in a great way where we have
Yeah.
crop rotation. Do we need 3 times the amount of yields like that's going to be
No.
grown and sold, right? I don't know.
We don't. Yeah. And the food waste problem, like we cannot, like that's again, one of the faulty things with the whole GMO argument, because it's not addressing the fact that we have food waste.
Yeah.
It's not addressing the fact that a lot of those species are grown for bioethanol and things like that, biofuels. A lot
Animal
of the
feed.
cropland animal feed is really important. Animal feed we need to talk about all day long. Until the 70s, animal feed was very biodiverse. And it switched it to high glycemic index corn, which would fatten the cattle. Well, also that accelerated the erosion of the nutritional profile of beef to the point where now it's considered not a heart healthy food. Where if you look at like truly regeneratively grazed beef, it's like not even, it doesn't even look like the same food under nutritional evaluation. It looks
Really?
like a different food. Yeah, the omega-3 ratio is so much higher if they're pasture grazed.
I haven't eaten red meat since high school, so this
It is
like
a totally different deal. And, corn fat and feedlot beef is just not good food. It's not good for you. Animals are a very important part of the crop diversification and regenerative diversification movement. In fact, if I had the capital I needed, that would be something that we would either set up a partner company to manage or a satellite company under Snacktivist, because we need to have those channels for grade B grains that are diverse. Like sorghum is fantastic for grazing cattle and sheep and chicken. It's considered scratch, but it's, all of these different crops have roles. And historically speaking, not until modern times did we just feed one critter the same food all day long and expect it to be healthy. That's
Right.
just not how nature works. Unless you're a panda bear, but pandas are at high risk for extinction. So last time I checked, that's probably not a good model to follow. Sorry, pandas. Like, I feel really bad, but why would we follow that model when we know from a scientific perspective, it's not resilient? The goal is anti-fragile systems. It's like, how do we intentionally create systems that are not fragile? And diversity is the key operating system there.
Wow.
Genetic diversity.
I agree. I think that's really awesome, and it's a great mission. And we've barely even gotten to touch on Snacktivist and
Oh my goodness.
all of the.
Well, that's okay, because Snacktivist is a business that supports this ethos going into the market in several different ways, and then our other projects like Civic, Collaborative Integrated Value Chain, is a facility in Montana that will allow us to start processing more biodiverse crops, organic rotations, a real focus on organic at that facility, and allergen-free crops. And then my work with my tech company as well, which we're actually going to be rebranding. I'm really excited. We haven't done a rollout of the new name yet, but that's going to be working to capture that incredible information. Like, Snacktivist has historically been really focused on grains, but I'm going to give a little sneak peek. We actually have a really fascinating project coming out with potatoes, because potatoes have also experienced a total loss of genetic diversity, and they've been bred for high glycemic index, high sugar. We have a partner who is joining Snacktivist team, and we're launching a regenerative potato project that will help bring potato diversity back to the equation as well. And we've got some really exciting partners that want to get this to the market where we can have a low glycemic index potato.
That would be amazing. And if we're ever able to get that in my hands, I will make so many potato dishes.
I know. Well, potatoes are, again, one of those amazing staples. But the way that we farm potatoes is like intensive. So it needs tons of chemicals. There's some of the most chemically covered things around. I mean, it's just incredible. But the farmers that we're working with, I mean, they're working towards regeneration. They're not regenerative yet, but they are doing incredible work, and they have reduced their chemical load like incredibly, over 90%.
Wow.
And they're still producing potatoes at scale. Beautiful potatoes.
Really? At scale? That's
Yep, they've taken a very slight knock, but considering they're saving hundreds of thousands of dollars per pivot on chemicals, economically totally pencils out. And it's a higher quality nutrition potato.
Wow.
Higher fiber. We're wanting to do like all the nutrient density evaluation too.
That's
but
fantastic.
Better shelf life, so reduces food waste. When you do the true cost accounting, you start seeing that little tiny loss in yield actually isn't really loss after all. You know what I mean?
Do you think that we'll ever get regenerative ag at scale to...
Oh yeah, we'll have to. I mean, it'll happen. We need more agronomists, and we need AI-enabled agronomy to scale globally. We have to. The paradigm has to shift, because you look at soil health around the world, and then you look at climate change, and then you look at lack of regenerative nutrition. Regenerative nutrition, real quick, is what I call like this new paradigm, which is macros, micros, phytos, and no-nos. And so macros and micros, everybody knows what those are. But regenerative drives micronutrients and phytonutrients, which we've never really tracked and traced. And then the no-nos are like the biocide chemical residues that people don't want on their food, even if it's not organic. They're like, I don't want a glyphosate desiccated oat. You know, like the Cheerios lawsuit that's going on right now. It's high enough where it should be declared as an ingredient. And there's a big class action lawsuit about it.
I hadn't heard about that. I'm definitely going to have to do some
it's a
digging
fascinating thing. So that's what I call like the four pillars of regenerative nutrition. It's macros, micros, phytos, and no-nos. And so, again, our tech company is building a module to verify that and to help communicate that to consumers. So, you know, whether it's fully regenerative and verified or not, whether it's fully organic and verified or not, you can literally buy something like a bag of regenerative, like a bag of Snacktivist potatoes. Let's just say it's not yet regenerative and it's not organic, but you can go, wow, this has a better micro and macronutrient profile. It has some cool phytonutrients like pigments, you know, like yellow and different colored potatoes have cool pigments. Yeah, they do. And those are good for health. They're cancer protectants, etc. And actually seeing verification that you're like, cool, this has like fewer chemicals and I can see proof of it. Because I think that's what's going to drive the market.
Yeah. That's so fascinating. We are coming up on time here, so I want to ask you just a couple more questions. What is something that you wish more people knew about in the world of food sustainability?
Gosh, that's a tough question.
You're involved in so many different things.
Honestly, I just wish people would just stop and think about where their food came from. That's step one.
Yeah.
You know, just stop treating it like just this mindless consumption. Like just intentionality is honestly the first step. Because once you just start thinking about it, that opens up the gates to everything else. And everyone else's experience around food sustainability is going to be very individually driven. So just being mindful of like, hey, I just bought some French fries. Where did they come from? Or I'm eating a baguette. Where did that come from? You know, just thinking about that as the first step.
Yeah, I love that. And I think as someone who, you know, my background's in food science, one of the biggest things that we always talked about is people just kind of expect that food shows up on their plate and they have no idea all of the intricate science and things that go on to get that food from farm to factory to grocery store to your plate. And there's different, it's one of those that the industries that people don't think about.
It's so complex.
Yeah, it's so complex, and I agree. I mean, long story short, I agree is that there's, I wish people also put a little bit more thought.
Just that stop and think moment. Rather than going, is this good or is it bad? Like we default to this puritanical, guilt-driven problem, and then people just give up. Just start thinking about what is it? Where did it come from? Like that's the first step. And then it doesn't make me feel good. Not if it's good or bad. Good or bad is like silly. We need to throw that whole thing out. It doesn't make me feel good.
Yeah.
Because guess what? My husband, the stuff that makes him feel good is totally different than what makes me feel good. Yeah. Everyone's different. They have different needs nutritionally and different guts. And it's going to be very individual for everybody. So enough of this silliness about diet drama.
Yeah, good and bad are often used as blanket statements for everybody across the board. And that's one thing I've been hearing a little bit about, or seen more about recently, is people are like demonizing sugar that's coming in fruit. And
it just goes overboard. Yeah. It just goes overboard, like all of it, like, I have some friends who are carnivore diets, and it's like, they just go on these tirades about how every phytonutrient is toxic. I'm like,
no.
So that's why bears like live on like blueberries, right? It's like, we're not the only species that has a, omnivore habit. Like, come on. I just think adaptation and resiliency is usually best embodied with diversity and creativity. It's like, that's why humans are effective species at doing things, is because we can adapt and we can use ingenuity to do things differently. So we need to use ingenuity to unscrew up our food system. Because as Dan Kittredge always says, if we broke it, then we know how to fix it.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really good line. I use it a lot.
Is there anything else you want to talk about for, Snacktivist or your tech company that we haven't talked about today? Any final thoughts?
No, but there's a lot of really exciting news coming. Snacktivist is totally taking a massive pivot. So we're not going to be the company that we were a couple years ago, which is exciting because that wasn't really what we founded our company to do anyways. It was just kind of what we had to do to get through COVID, and also just being a woman entrepreneur. Like, that's what you're told. You're like, oh, you can run a brand. That's allowable. But doing something really disruptive or systems level is usually kind of scoffed at, So yeah, I'm really excited for us to move beyond just being another mom-owned food brand and actually really get into this more disruptive play, which is exciting.
I'm here for that.
So,
that sounds amazing.
Yeah, and we're going to be raising capital. No capital, no progress. That's just the name of the game, and it's been a really rough environment for raising capital the last couple of years, and especially for innovators. We've just had to work on fumes, and that's just silly. You think about what we've accomplished in the last couple of years. Imagine if we actually had any money to do anything with it. Like, we could have done it 10x, so it's just a really important lesson for anybody out there who's investing or has access to capital.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And where can people support you and buy Snacktivist products?
Well, they can always buy products online. Amazon, we are always going to keep our branded products on Amazon and our website and places like that. So for now, that's the best. That's the easiest. So snacktivistfoods.com. And we're going to do a complete reboot to our website next month. So people can join in and follow along on the journey.
That's so exciting.
Yeah.
Great. Well, that's it for our time today, Joni, but thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, I know that was a lot of information to throw at you, but, we are a rooted in science company. We're like a complexity food company. But that's how we're, really trying to build things that are going to cause change for real.
Yeah,
so.
And I think it all starts from science, too. If we don't understand the science behind it, when is it ever going to work?
Yeah, and yeah, exactly. Bringing together the power of biology and nature and then understanding it through the lens of science, that's when we really reach a good model that makes a ton of sense, because it's like a nice blend. It's balanced. Yeah, so that's where we're focused. Yeah, it's exciting.
That's great. And that aligns perfectly what Made to Sustain is, because I'm all about how do we make a more sustainable food system using food science and make more sustainable foods through food science. So we
totally
100%.
Food science is awesome.
Yeah, it is underrated.
It is, and it needs more attention because it's really a cool study, honestly. So thanks for having me on, and I'm glad that you have this podcast. It's a really great topic, and I'm really honored to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining. And that's a wrap for this week's episode of the Made to Sustain podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. I found the conversation absolutely fascinating. And And my top 3 takeaways from this week's episode are that there's a lot of work ongoing in the background and behind the scenes in order to make changes in our food system, and it's just a matter of finding a right home for these really unique ingredients and really important ingredients as well. But with that being said, I think there's also a place for this wave of new technology that's coming that can help make this possible. So things like quantifying the emissions saved by planting regenerative crops, right? And how do we make that possible? And that's really a big part of the selling story there. And the last key takeaway, the most actionable takeaway for me, is that I really want to choose more ancient grains in the grocery store to introduce a variety and to introduce more variety into my diet overall, and try to get access to different micronutrients. I think that's something really easy and a small step that we can all take and can help add a little bit more excitement to our plates. Once again, this was a fascinating conversation, and I really enjoyed talking with Joni. I can't wait to have her back on the show once she's all rolled out with her new tech platform. I think it's going to be a fascinating discussion. But make sure you tune in next week, where we'll be talking with Anna Hammond, who's the founder of Matriarch Foods. She has a really awesome upcycled tomato sauce line, and I'm really excited to share my conversation with her and all of the grassroots work that she's doing as well. If you like this episode of Made to Sustain, please leave us a 5-star review. That means so much. And the best thing that you can do is share it with a friend. That means the world to me. It really helps support the podcast more than you realize, and it's free for you to do. And if you're looking to learn more about food sustainability and more recipes, make sure you visit madetosustain.com and sign up for our weekly newsletter, where you can get notified for all of our latest topics, and you can learn more about all of the things that we're doing over here on Made to Sustain. Because individually, our small actions add up collectively to make a difference. Thank you so much for joining on this week's episode, and I can't wait for you to hear more episodes soon. Thanks. Bye.